We begin our walk today on the unceded lands of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. I acknowledge that this sacred country belongs to First Nations peoples, and I am an uninvited guest on this land. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. This audio walk is designed to be listened to in situ with a planned route. However, I invite you to listen to this podcast wherever you feel comfortable. If you are following the recommended route, please find yourself in Fawkner Park, stop 1. It is spring now, and the sweeping pathways are now lined with glorious leafy trees, their skeletons covered with a quilt of green. It makes me think of romantic European countryscapes. I love this park. Start to make your way towards Toorak Road. There is no rush or right way to get there. You can just pause the audio at any moment until you reach the next marker. Melbourne's stream of lockdowns has made me become intimately connected with my immediate locality. I know each side street, the people, even the little Italian greyhound which trots around Fawkner Park every day. I have become so immersed in the public space that envelops my apartment that I feel connected to it. It is intimately mine. Each day during Melbourne's 6th lockdown, like so many others, I would use my hour of daily exercise to walk and listen to a podcast or one of my newly curated music playlists. I feel a sense of nostalgia, heaviness, as I reminisce on this glacially slow winter. It feels as if it was both the fastest and slowest months of my life. As if it lasted an entire year, time suspended and hung as we continued on a conveyor belt of routine. My walk was my slice of solace in each day, something to look forward to. This park, well, actually all parks, but I guess this park in particular, as I know it the most intimately, epitomises the tension of public and private space. In its literal purpose, it is designed to be used by the community. We all own it in an arbitrary sort of way. But then it also feels so personal, private. The narration or conversations of my podcast can only be heard by me. There is an exclusive element of privacy, I feel, as I walk past the elderly couple with their small white dog, or the young mum juggling 2 crying children using her back and limbs as branches for their monkey-like arms to hang on to. We all share the publicness of space, yet this is a concealed privacy. Only me and you engage with relationality of this audio. As the sun sets, this park transverses more prominently into the private sector. I am a woman. This space is no longer safe for me, as the small pockets of golden light from the street lamps are not enough to protect me from potential threats. It is familiar, but it is not predictable. It is thus privatised public space.
In terms of spaces I feel the most unsafe in, initially what springs to mind is me walking alone in the dark at night on a street, particularly in a street that I'm not very familiar with. Like, even if I'm walking home at the moment, there is an element of that I feel nervous and scared that I don't know what's out there, but because of familiarity of the area, I'm like, I don't feel as bad. So I would say in terms of unsafe space, it's probably being in a very unfamiliar street that's dark, it's late at night.
I would agree with that. I think like whether you've been in the space before or not plays a huge role, because I feel really comfortable like going for runs sort of in sunset time and like when it's getting dark and stuff, because I'm really familiar with like where I live and everything, whereas like if I'm in an environment that I'm not familiar with, like I find it really easy to feel uncomfortable because I don't know what's around the next corner, like I don't know which streets are well lit, I don't know like if there's going to be people or cars around to, you know, hear me scream if that sort of comes to that.
Do you think that kind of comes from a sense of like, even though you're in public space, it feels almost private in a way that you have an intimate connection with it because you know what it is. So even though it is in public space,
it feels private because like I live here.
Mm-hmm.
It feels private because it's my space.
And I guess like the more familiar you are with the space, the more familiar you are with any external factors that enter that space. So because, for example, this current residence that we live in, we've lived here for about a year. I'm familiar with the neighbours, I'm familiar with the people that linger in the streets, the shops, the trams, anything that's kind of part of that space. So I think you have more familiarity with any external factor that is entering that so-called private space.
Into your space.
Yeah, but even though, like you said, it's still a public space, it becomes more private the longer you're there, the more familiar you get with it, because I guess as human beings, right, like what makes it really scary is external factors you're unaware about.
Do you think that kind of element of control plays a big part in how you feel in a space?
I think so. Like having control over your own safety as a woman is a big thing.
Yeah.
I guess, the places where I would feel the most unsafe would be as someone who's afraid of the dark, anywhere where it's dark. So, like, and especially if you're on the street at night time and if there's residential properties around you but none of them got their lights on, that really freaks me out, because then it's like if something did happen and I screamed, maybe there would be no one to hear me. But, familiarity would definitely play a big part in it.
I hope you have made it to Toorak Road. We're going to cross over the road and head north on Park Street. I love looking at the houses along these streets. Their grand facades, austere and charming. They remind me of New York apartments. 5 or so steps up to the front door, small winding staircases that lead you down to concealed basements. Very Sex and the City. I feel a sense of existential dread when I think about classic American sitcoms. Friends, How I Met Your Mother, and so on. I too am a 20-something-year-old living with her best friends in a city apartment. But what happens when that all comes to an end? Coming towards the end of my undergraduate degree makes me feel so lost. What are my next steps? Career, husband, kids, house, small winding staircases that lead me down to my basement? Frightfully heteronormative and traditional. It seems too far but too near, as if I'm in limbo. I don't know where I'll fit in. I don't know where I'll fit in the art world. I feel like I cannot speak their language, as if I am an imposter. It's so daunting, yet so many of its people are so welcoming and kind. Again, tension. One small word, but it seems to be the centre of so many big conceptual ideas.
Realistically, for IAE, International Art Language and Academic Language, particularly for me, there will always be space for it for me, because English isn't my first language, and I've spent years sanitizing my accent, and when standard English and jargoned art speak rules, I guess, cultural supremacy, it is impossible to be heard when you're not speaking that. And especially for me, if I don't speak standard English and if I don't speak academic language and if I don't write that way or speak that way, it's impossible for me to be heard.
We come to Domain Road at the edge of the Botanical Gardens, stop 2. There is a steady stream of people running and walking around the tan track. We'll follow them around the outskirts of the gardens, going in a clockwise direction. The Botanical Gardens feel like a place people go to be seen. My anxious thoughts circle around me like all the runners around the gardens. Today we won't be going around the entirety of the circuit. The path opens and closes. The outside world appears in ebbs and flows. Moments of quiet are later met with the rushing cars and trams on St Kilda Road. Tension. To the right, there are a series of wrought iron gates that are ajar, leading us towards an inner city sanctuary of flora and fauna. The dark charcoal paint blends in with the greenery. Perhaps for a moment you can forget the hum of busy Melbourne traffic. Maybe not. It is busy. Public. We can head inside later. To the left, we are coming towards the city. Reaching skyscrapers are becoming more and more prominent in the skyline. Distance creates a sense of privatization. Looking at the bustling streets and city lights from the height of a building captures my feelings of fleeting moments of privacy in public spaces. Perhaps this voyeurism encapsulates the dichotomy of private and public space. It holds a foot in each end of the spectrum. When we are removed from spectatorship, or even partake in the spectating of others, we feel private, safe, alone. Maybe it is this distance which reinforces this feeling of privacy. From people, from traffic, responsibilities. If you are familiar with Melbourne, you might recognise the buildings to the left. Some of Melbourne's most influential and iconic galleries and art institutions are in this wedge of the city, the Arts Precinct, stop 3. The Privatization of public space comes in various forms, neither exclusive to a single gallery or ecology. Alike to our contemporary society, it is global.
Queer aesthetics, in the curatorial sense, has to do three things. It has to break down the white cube and basically remove all of the concepts around that stark white area that art should exist in. It also has to engage with the audience, so it has to directly interact with them, and it also has to challenge the audience, and it also has to engage with the body in a way. And when I say engage with the body, that could be physically or mentally or emotionally. So queer aesthetics is obviously based in queer experience, but it's more tangibly tied to the colonial sense of removing a lot of the stereotypes around galleries that came about in the 20th century. So it is often used by queer artists and queer curators, but it is not exclusive to them. Yeah, it's about opening up the gallery and pioneering art that is directly challenging, more so than traditional curatorial concepts.
So I'm not really interested in entering galleries, to be honest. Like, I don't even like going to galleries. Like, I find them boring. I find it quite judgy. There's just this elitism.
Now we are going to head into the city, across Prince's Bridge and straight ahead into Federation Square. A sobering discovery happened along the development of this project for me. As an able-bodied and relatively fit person, I have never felt troubled or impacted by the accessibility of sites. I have walked across the busy square many times and never really considered how the centre of our city could be so exclusive for many people with disabilities. Cobbled, uneven pavers make even my steady feet feel unstable, a metropolis minefield for anyone slightly uneasy on their feet. Yet this square holds concerts, protests, video screenings, performances, charity events. The list goes on and on and on. Can a public space that is not accessible to everyone truly be public? Is public defined as something available to everyone? Anyone? Is there ever such a space that can be holistically public? Towards the back of the square is the National Gallery's Ian Potter Centre, Stop 4. Australia's, and more specifically Victoria's, colonial history is very evident. Colonial settler oil paintings and artworks feature prominently, and whilst the Indigenous collection is not excluded, the impacts of colonial violence cannot be ignored. Privatization of public art galleries comes from the webbed layers of elitism. Supported by colonial, patriarchal and capitalist roots, there is a claustrophobic tension.
I think coming from a place that doesn't necessarily have a lot of well-established artist-run institutions, you know, there's those state galleries that emerged in the gold rush era, which had a very specific audience and agenda. When I go to Melbourne, Naarm and visit different ARIs, I always feel very nervous that I don't fit the mould of an art person or an art appreciator, and that stems from, you know, insecurities and like imposter syndrome, also a lot of you know, background of anxiety and things like that. I think it's something that even people who are very established feel, and it's wrong. It just shouldn't. These are meant to be spaces for everyone to enjoy and participate in, and it's just never feels that way.
Oftentimes, if you go to an exhibition that includes work of First Nations people and it'll say unknown artist, and if you think about that long enough, you realise the reason the artist wasn't known is because they didn't care. It wasn't relevant to them.
And it kind of shows how it was acquired. If the artist isn't known, it wasn't acquired in a mutual transaction. It was stolen.
Exactly. And you can see that parallel. For example, if you look at the install shots of primitivism in the 20th century on MoMA's website, they have every single install shot that includes a work of a cubist. And then if you look at the Indigenous work that's next to it, nothing is listed. And that just highlights this stark colonial practice of curating work and collecting work, where there was no care, there was no thought. And it's incredibly damaging because it's almost gatekeeping people of colour and Indigenous people out of galleries. And it is, to an extent, still used today.
As promised earlier, it is time to head back to the botanical gardens. Make your way back over the Yarra and then back onto the track towards the botanical gardens. Now let's find a gate to go through. Any gate will do. The foliaged walls of the garden seem to cancel out all of Melbourne's noise. It seems impossibly bizarre that something so close to so many people can feel like an oasis. No buildings, no cars, public, but feels like your very own private space. Tension? Perhaps. I think this is a comfortable tension. It is one that allows me to feel safe. Through the development of this project, over the depths and lows of lockdown, I have experienced the people and places physically near me so closely. It has made me question what is public and what is private for me. The hierarchy of things that are truly private to somewhat private. These places hold such stringent memories for me. They traverse my memories from a child to a young adult, but I do not think I could have known them as closely as I do now. I think this is where I feel nostalgia coming out of lockdowns. The spring weather, champagne picnics, and these leafy parks. Things that were once very public, but somehow after these 2 long years feel so intimately private, just for me.